You know, video games have long since been a subject of controversy over the years, oftentimes being blamed for real-life acts of violence. Usually from out-of-touch boomers like politicians, the press, and incompetent parents. Cause let's be honest, why take responsibility for being a terrible parent when you could just blame Grand Theft Auto? But this whole video games make children violent shtick is something that isn't new. In fact, it's been going on for almost 50 years now. And the best part, it's always been as funny as it was ridiculous. I mean, people were losing their minds in the 70s over a game with stick figures in it. Stick figures. We weren't even close to realistic graphics, and already parents were losing their minds, thinking little Billy was one arcade quarter away from becoming a full-fledged criminal. So let's take a deep dive into some of the most hilarious parental panics that video games have caused over the years, while also seeing if any of their arguments hold up. Spoiler, they probably don't. The year of 1976 marks the first major gaming controversy, though there were a few smaller ones in the early 70s. For example, in 1973, Atari released a two-player maze game called Gotcha, with some questionable art and booby controllers. Seriously, Atari, what were you guys thinking? However, the first major violent video games controversy was in 1976, with the release of Death Race. This caused a controversy? Developed by Exidy in 1976, Death Race was really just a modified version of their previous game called Destruction Derby. Now, why was this a modified version of a previous game? Same reason I'm making YouTube videos. Don't have money! Problem is, I haven't made $1 so far. With their last game in a licensing nightmare and their next game still in development, Exidy decided to alter their last game just enough to sell it as a brand new title.
Well, first of all, just a new twist into the game. We took the cabinet, painted it black, and tried to project skeletons or gremlins running across a graveyard. And that's how we changed the game, and the sales went up quite a bit.
Little did Exidy realize just how much controversy Death Race was going to bring them. News article after news article was made about this game, as well as even press coverage.
Volkswagen, it's not a Christmas tree, right? It's a human being. Is it harmful? To the extent that it again sanctions practice, training, learning how to hurt, kill other people, it sets the stage for when people are instigated to aggression to use those skills that they have.
This guy's a fool. But what exactly is the goal in Death Race? Simple. Each round you are given 100 seconds to run over as many people as you can, and for each one you kill, a gravestone will appear in its place, which make it harder and harder to hit enemies over time. They also emit a very high shrieking sound when they are killed. Is it a little edgy for an arcade game in 1976? Yeah, but despite the backlash, the game was still a success, and by 1978, people just moved on. But before the world lost its mind over Mortal Kombat and other games in the 90s, there was another kind of violence controversy. An era of gaming that most people would just rather forget about. Back in the 80s, Atari had a brilliant business model. Literally anyone could make and sell their own game. No approval process necessary, no quality control, and no screening. What could go wrong? And with that freedom came a unique wave of games. One of the most well-known examples of these adult games was Custer's Revenge, a nightmare of a game where you play as General Custer with the goal being to get revenge. What? You must make your way across to the other side of the screen while dodging arrows, and it gets worse. Needless to say, this was a game that actually sold at stores and garnered major backlash, and for good reason. Who thought this was a good idea?
General Custer, fighting his way past Indian arrows. You score the big points in this game by getting the general to an Indian woman.
All the worst kinds of things in society which we would like to eliminate. So I think that they're very detrimental.
A game for the whole family! While Custer's Revenge was the only one of these games to gain major controversy, there were a lot of these games. Then there was General's Retreat, which was a gender-swapped version of Custer's Revenge. Now he knows what it feels like.
But joke's on you, because he's into that crap!
As well as several other games like Philly Flasher, The Bachelor games, a game called Harem, which is very obscure, X-Man, which is not a Marvel game. Oh gosh, what the heck? He didn't last very long. And several other games of these exist out there. There was no shortage of what the games on the Atari. And this was all because there was no quality control for the games that were put on the system. If you can make it, they would sell it. But once the gaming crash of 1983 happened, these games all just kind of died off.
A new video game that hit the market this week is triggering controversy. It features action-packed violence.
Cold-blooded murder is making Mortal Kombat the most popular video game in history.
Critics, including the National PTA, say such video games contribute to violence in real life.
It's training them to enjoy and like violence as a form of conflict resolution.
Upon its release in 1992, Mortal Kombat took the news headlines by storm. The press were disgusted by it, the parents were horrified, and the children loved it. Because after all, why play boring old Street Fighter when you could punch someone's head off in Mortal Kombat? Needless to say, people treated Mortal Kombat like it was single-handedly raising a generation of future serial killers.
Statement of aggression, and then if you're aggressive, you win, instead of negotiating or compromising.
When you play a game that takes violence to the ultimate extreme, where a child can vicariously be a murderer, that signals something is desperately wrong with our sense of entertainment.
But RoboCop's okay, guys, as well as, Terminator and Total Recall and literally every other 80s action movie. See, this is the problem with their logic in the 90s. Violent video games are bad, but movies that are violent are A-okay. Now, people can make the argument that there was a rating system for movies and there wasn't really one for games, but by the time Mortal Kombat released, Sega already had their own rating system. And in the midst of this moral gaming crisis, one man stood up, an unsung hero. Enter Joe Lieberman. This senator was a man on a mission to put an end to violent video games for good. He put together press conferences with other politicians and led congressional hearings on violent video games, holding Mortal Kombat as evidence that violent video games were causing problems for the youth. To make matters worse, Mortal Kombat wasn't the only game under fire at old Joe's hearing, as the game Night Trap, another game stewing in controversy, would also be targeted. Night Trap was an interactive movie game where you play as a security systems operator trying to protect a group of women from getting kidnapped by mysterious invaders. And like I said, in Night Trap, your goal is to protect people, but to old Joe, context is irrelevant. Both Mortal Kombat and Night Trap were debated on in court, labeled as everything under the sun by politicians in their little circle jerk discussion. Long story short, all the big gaming companies got together and the ESRB was formed. All that screaming, panicking, and worry just for a sticker on a box. Throughout the following years, a few other slightly controversial games would be released across the 90s, but nothing ever really gained the same level of controversy that games like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap did. But I mean, what could possibly get more violent than Mortal Kombat?
Completely whole new level. The game is called Manhunt 2, and players simulate various acts of murder.
Now to this video game, so horrifying it has been banned in Great Britain.
From strangulation to stabbing, should parents be worried about it?
Now you'd think that the violence craze of the 90s would have finally put an end to the whole video games make children violent thing. But yeah, no, it didn't. Because in 2003, Rockstar dropped Manhunt, a stealth-based game where you execute people in the most brutal fashion possible, with whatever weapons you have on hand. The game was extremely violent and basically pushed a lot of boundaries, taking inspiration from things like snuff films. But the controversy went nuclear after it was blamed for a real-life murder in the United Kingdom, which was later debunked. Still, this didn't help Manhunt's public image much, and Rockstar, being the chads that they are, naturally made a sequel to it. In 2007, Manhunt 2 would be published, pushing everything even further than the previous game did. More violence, a protagonist who was a mentally unstable asylum patient, and even more brutal executions. And this time, things went too far, because Manhunt 2 got banned in multiple countries and got an adult-only rating by the ESRB. Which basically meant good luck selling this game, effer. And Rockstar, quickly panicking at worrying about losing a bunch of money from this game, decided to tone down the violence just a little bit by making it a little bit blurry. And it actually worked, with the ESRB changing the rating to mature.
What's that? I can't see exactly how I'm smashing someone's cranium? Well, I think we can call it mature now.
But even being lowered to a mature rating, Manhunt 2 was still heavily criticized by the press. Ironically, the biggest criticism was the Wii version.
The experience is even more intense using Nintendo's Wii game console, which gets players to act out the violence.
You play this game on Wii as opposed to Nintendo or PlayStation, you actually do the stabbing. So you grab the knife, you are over your victim, plunging the knife into the victim as you play the...
You grab the knife, you are over your victim, plunging the knife.
Even with the controversies, though, that Manhunt 1 and 2 received, at the end of the day, they just faded into obscurity and nothing ever came of either of them. See, the controversy has never stopped. It's just evolved over the years. In the 2010s era, games like Hotline Miami 2 got banned in some countries for violence. Call of Duty has oftentimes been criticized for glorifying war. And the GTA series are still being criticized for glorifying the crime life to this day. And despite multiple studies having been shown that there is no real link between real-life violence and video games turning children violent, it's still an endless debate. But even if video games don't turn young children violent, can it at the very least desensitize them to real-life violence? And that's a more tricky question. One thing's for sure though, older generations will always fear and blame whatever the new trend the youth are into. Just look at how older generations were, being sure that comic books were poisoning the minds of the youth. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm off to go continue my simulated training.